Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you are calling, anywhere in this world. My name is Joan Marie, and I'm the producer of the V2020 initiative and this webinar series, and your moderator for today's call. The purpose of this series is to prepare ourselves and the world for the year 2020. This represents the 150th anniversary of the Mother's Day Proclamation, helping stir and launch the international suffragette movement, and it'll be the 100th anniversary in 2020 of the 19th Amendment in the United States, which set the precedents for women all around the world. 2020 also signifies crystal vision, necessary for looking back at what we've learned from our past with clear intentions for moving forward to a more compassionate and equitable future for all. It's in looking back that we can identify the moments in history where the sacred was made profane, and we can start the conversations to restore and elevate our wisdom, creativity, and glorious disruptive nature. V2020 is a campaign to elevate the voices of women and girls everywhere by acknowledging an 18th sustainable goal of self-examination. Together, we're midwifing a new paradigm that must come from the womb and through the voice. This requires women and girls to stop comparing ourselves to others and to know that we are enough. In fact, we're being called upon to show up with that which only we can bring, and that is only unique to each one of us. And this is where we can wake up, light up, and rise. In a moment, I'm going to introduce our three speakers, but I first wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping. If you're on your computer, you can see a comment box or Q&A box where you can post any questions that you may have. Also, we'll take this time to find out where you're calling from. And after our together, we're going to move into our after party, where you'll all be brought into the call and have a chance for us to hear your voice. Reverend Joan Brown Campbell may not be with us in the after party due to scheduling conflicts. So if you have any questions for her during the hour interview, you can go ahead and send them over and I'll try and fit them in. This call is being brought to you by the generous support of Zoom, and it is being recorded. So a copy of this recording and any links or mentions will be sent to you in a follow-up email. Normally, this is where I would be telling you a little bit about the Charter for Compassion and the women and girls sector, but this entire call is all about our charter. So I'll just say on behalf of the Charter for Compassion, the Women and Girls Leadership, and our ambassadors, thank you for being with us. Let us take a moment to join together in breath. A deep inhale and a deep exhale. Let's do one more. We each can become aware of how we're breathing as one from all around the world. May we each receive and elevate our minds and hearts through this conversation. It's now my delight to welcome our speakers. I'm first going to introduce Reverend Dr. Joan Brown Campbell. She's the chair of the Charter's Board of Directors, an ordained minister who worked with Martin Luther King during the Civil Rights Movement, and is currently a coordinator of the Wise Women's Council with the Charter for Compassion's Women and Girls. Reverend Joan has been the first woman of just about everything she's done and has inspired so many throughout the years, including her daughter, who became the first woman mayor of Cleveland. We're so very honored to have her with us today. Our next guest is Marilyn Turkovich. She is serving as the director of the Global Charter for Compassion since 2013. She has her finger on the pulse of the entire charter movement with extensive knowledge and experience working with and helping to develop more than 400 cities and regions of compassion worldwide. And then we also have Sandy Hart, who is the director of the Charter for Compassion Women and Girls sector and the president of SARA, the Spiritual and Religious Alliance for Hope. Sandy also developed SDG 18, the unofficial Sustainable Developmental Goal of personal awareness and self-agency, which we'll talk more about as well. So hello and welcome to the three of you. Reverend Joan, are you on the call?
Hi, Joan. Actually, we're having a little technical difficulty, but we're working on the back end. So Reverend Joan, just hold tight and we'll bring you up, and maybe we can start with Marilyn.
Okay, great. Well, Marilyn, one of the first questions I'm going to ask each of you is, what does compassion mean to you, and what compelled you to get involved in the compassion movement?
That's a great question. What compassion means to me is looking and working with other people at the issues that are of grave concern to them. And I think that I probably grew up in a family that did just that, an immigrant family who was very excited about being in the United States, but also had a real, I think, desire to really help other people. And so I think that was as part of my upbringing and being involved in civil rights and an activist against the Vietnam War. It just seemed the right thing to do. And what compassion means to me is action. And that I think there's several difficult parts of compassion. And one of the most important ones, I think, is acting in solidarity with others and listening to others and taking the lead from others. And I think I learned that working with a group of North American women and women from Guatemala during the war that they were engaged in there. And I learned many lessons about, the importance of compassionate listening and to really question your own wisdom. And I think that's a part of compassion. Orwell always said that if you want to know about other people, the best thing to do is to keep your mouth shut and your eyes open. And I think that that's what happened with my involvement with the women from Guatemala, that we listened quite a bit. And while we often thought that we had the answers to some of the problems and the processes in which we were engaged, they weren't probably the right ones. And so we learned that we had true leaders who were the ones who were really going to help us in helping them. So I think that's what compassion means, at least for me.
That's really powerful. And I think we're all kind of being challenged on how to develop deeper skills on really listening and what that means for each of us. So especially with everything that's up right now, tell us a little bit more about what it means for you as the director of the Global Charter, and what's your vision of the charter movement?
Well, I think that we put the trust where I believe it needs to be, and that's in the hearts and minds of the people who are really creating their community initiative, their city initiative, because they know best what needs to be done. And so in terms of where the Charter for Compassion fits in there, that we're building a network, and as we are continuing to build the network, what we're trying to do is to really offer services that anyone or all of the compassionate cities can take advantage of. And so, for example, April 5th, we did our first 24-hour webcast. So we went around the world, this initiative and the Golden Rule Project. And what we wanted to do was to highlight exactly what was going on in different places in the world, and to give people their voice and for them to have an opportunity to tell their story and to learn from one another. The other thing, and just prior to this call that I've been working on, is a project called Think Equal. And Think Equal is growing from being a curriculum of kindness, empathy, and compassion for very young children from the age of 3 to 5. Hopefully it'll continue on through the years. And there are wonderful people behind it. And what we're working in conjunction with the Think Equal people in the United Kingdom. And we're right now going to be involved in running a pilot in the state of Nuevo León, particularly around the area of Monterrey. And so we're just putting the pieces together, which means bringing trainers in because it's essentially a free curriculum, but at the same time, you need to have some materials, you need to train the trainer, you need to set up an evaluation system. And we're very grateful because Yale is participating in the evaluation end of things. So that's what the charter does. We have about 6 or 7 projects that are like that, so that compassionate cities and communities can take advantage of what these programs are. The other thing is that we're very enriched with having over 2,000 partners in 12 different sectors. You mentioned Sandy being the coordinator of women and girls. And so in addition to that, there are 11 other sectors that are involved with issues from business to education, social justice, restorative justice, so that, you know, we really are, I believe, and try hard to be a network of networks where we make connections for people to help one another.
Thank you. Gosh, that's a great overview of everything. And it's such an honor to be part of such a program that really change all over the world. So thank you, Marilyn.
Yeah.
What about you, Sandy? What's your definition of compassion, and what prompted you to get involved with the compassion movement?
I'll start with your second question. What prompted me was about 2011, I was at an interfaith conference in Arizona. And I met a woman from an organization called Canadians for Compassion, and she was talking about Armstrong and this Charter for Compassion. Now, as an interfaith activist, I've always tried to find common threads, not only in our similarities, in our common approaches to tradition and religion, etc., but also our common problems, and try to get to the root of both. What is the root of our commonality and the root of our problems, and let's go there. And when I heard about the Charter for Compassion, all of a sudden the universe became right for me. All of a sudden bells rang and angels were strumming harps, and it just made sense. This concept of compassion being the clear and luminous force for our polarized world, and it just rang such truth for me. And then the concept of the charter, which was such in its embryonic stages at the time, you know, this concept of this, like Marilyn said, this network of, and the cities movement and the collective impact of how the city work, the stakeholders in the government work together with the common beacon, the common document of the Charter for Compassion itself as its guiding light. Again, it just made perfect sense for me. And so I bound off the airplane and came home to the Women's Interfaith Organization that I'm the president of, and called Sarah, Spiritual and Religious Lines for Hope, and called an emergency advisory council meeting and said, we got to do this. And everybody was, of course, you know, this makes perfect sense. It's in direct alignment with our vision and our value statement, and let's do this. But we couldn't decide whose city to do. whose city we were going to start with the city of compassion, because we were perfectly, poised in the community. We were, excuse me, we were working with local government. We worked with the homeless shelter and the domestic violence shelter, and we were organizing a weekend of community service already. We were very much embedded in our community, so it simply made sense to us. And so, with that said, we decided that we would just do all the cities in California until we could say we live in a state of compassion. And what we mean by do was that we would go and just sort of, suggest and recommend and support and nurture cities, and then get out of their way and start seeing enough cities within the state until we could actually look back and then go to the governor and go, look what's happening in our state. Now let's bring the state level in play and create a state of compassion. We had the idea of license plates and California state. We really, and this all came to be in about 2 minutes. It just all clicked, and and so we did that. And I know I personally spent many, many years traveling the world, actually, and speaking wherever I could about the cities of compassion. And we were part of bubbling interest in about 15 cities in California. And then it outgrew Sarah, and we handed it over to a set of hands. And from there, and now Compassionate California is off doing wonderful things. However, what I would, then in a few years later, I was in Guadalajara, and this will answer your first question. I was in Guadalajara at another interfaith conference where I met Dr. James Doty, who many of us know as the founding director of the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research Education at Stanford, and he's also one of the board members. He was a board member at the charter. So, and he gave this description of compassion. Compassion is the willingness to see the suffering of another, and a desire to to alleviate that suffering, to do something about it. And in that moment, it all rang true for me. Where I thought the universe was right, it got even straighter. All the stars lined up now, and it really made sense to me that compassion is an action word. Compassion is a difficult word. Karen Armstrong says a compassionate city is an uncomfortable city. At the women and girls sector, we believe that a compassionate woman is an uncomfortable woman because her community is suffering, her family is suffering, she is suffering.
Well, and I really like the word compassion as well, where empathy is kind of a buzzword now, but I think most of us that have these emotional feelings, that we need to move beyond that we can get overwhelmed if we stay in a place of empathy. And I think that compassion kind of puts us in more of a present state for our neighbor or the community, and allows us to assess more. How do you feel about the difference between empathy and compassion?
I spend a lot of time, and perhaps you do too, Marilyn, and I see Reverend Jones with us, so I'm just going to wrap this up so we can hear from her. I spend a lot of time dispelling the myth that compassion is a soft, warm, comfortable word, and replacing that with it is a hard, prickly, complicated, difficult, often painstaking. If you walk past a homeless person and you can honestly say you turn your eye, and that's an easy thing to do. No, it is tough. It is tough to look right into the eye of the suffering. And right now, it's all hands on deck in this world. Our world is, the pain and suffering has reached a fever pitch. And so we can't avoid, we can't turn an eye, we can't change the channel just flippantly and pretend that these things aren't happening around us because of our comfort level. We have to, as the charter says, remove ourselves from the center of the universe and put another in its place. And so, it's a tough word. a tough word. I'm so happy Reverend Joan has been able, and let me just apologize to everybody and to Reverend Joan. We had some technical difficulty, but she is the unsinkable Reverend Joan Brown Campbell.
Hello, Reverend Joan. Can you hear us okay?
Yes. Yes, I can hear fine. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
being on. We're so honored to have you with us. You've really been an example of really.
Oh, I just lost you.
There's a note that you've been the first woman of just about everything that you've done, and that really creates an inspiration. How do you feel about what do you feel was so inspiring for you to do what you're called to do?
Well, I think I would like to begin with my tribute to Karen Armstrong, because I was fortunate enough to have been with Karen as a friend and a companion in many of the projects that we were undertaking as women. And she really was the one who, when she was invited by TED, the TED people, I gave her, and they do to many people, the opportunity to choose something she would like to speak about. And she said she wanted to speak about compassion. This was 10 years ago.
Okay.
And at that point in time, the word had not been receiving the dignity and the credibility that it does now. And she began to lay out for people exactly in words that I just heard from all of you. When I was struggling to get in, I could still hear. And so as I was listening to your own descriptions, I thought her reason for choosing the word compassion was the word passion within it, that we are to take ourselves to a place where there's difficulty, where there's struggling, and our response to that should be one of compassion. But for her, she would stress the word passion, that we come to this with a will to work on it and to try and to be one with the person who is suffering, not so much to feel sorry for them. This has been her big point. It is not about feeling sorry, because in its own way, then you are feeling a little particularly better off or better, but that it is a way of saying, we walk with you. And we can walk with people with a compassionate mind, which makes us equal to one another. It isn't sorry for someone because of their trouble. And if Karen were here, she'd be wanting me to say, it is about struggle. It is not about feeling sorry. It's not about a call in the same way, but it is a struggle to deal with considerable passion with the things that separate us from one another and with the entities within life that keep people from being able to be all that they were created to be. And that's a Karen Armstrong speech. And because I have listened to her from the very beginning, and she didn't have any idea when she took the word compassion that it would take the growth. I talked to her just the other day and I said, aren't you overwhelmed at the growth that there's been in taking this word? And of course, Karen being Karen, if you knew her well, she'd say, yes, but I have to keep talking about compassion and its meaning and what it calls us to. And her greatest fear is that people will take it as feeling sorry for or committed to someone who is less than you. That compassion is really finding the places of hurt and humbling yourself enough to say, I want to give part of my life or much of my life to addressing some of the issues that separate people and make them feel less than who they are. So I'd be happy to answer questions, and I'd like that better. But this is very much when I feel when we begin these discussions, I think back on listening to her before there was a compassionate discussion that she helped to put forward. And she always says to me personally, Do not ever feel sorry. This is not the point. The point is you feel called to give of yourself toward the well-being of all humankind. And she has helped me with that by saying, of course, sometimes you come upon a situation and you're bound to feel sorry for that person because they're so much in need of, we've all had it as a mother, as a grandmother, as a great-grandmother now for me. And you want to put your arms around somebody. And it's the same. It's just a way of saying that for all of God's people, since I'm a preacher, I can use that language, that for all of God's people, we are one. And that's always been the lesson that I've been taught is we are one people. And it is helping people and being there, standing with somebody or with an issue that's before us, not just a person, but an issue that's facing the world. So I feel very gifted to have been with Karen as she put this forward and watched it come over now 10 years almost of development and how it's taken hold. My greatest frustration with it, and some of you may have had this experience, is I have a granddaughter who is very fluent in Spanish and spent time in Cuba working there and also going to a seminary there. And the word compassion is a difficult word in Spanish. And so that always made me have to think about what do we really mean by this word. And Karen would always say, it is to walk with. It is not to be better than. It is not to feel sorry for. It's not just to feel called to something, but it is to recognize in the mood of compassion what it is that we must be about.
I really agree with that. We were recently, Brenda Kress and myself, we were having a conversation about compassion and what it means. And one of the things that that we found that rang true was having faith that it's not necessarily our job to fix something, that there's nothing wrong with another human being or the situation, that that by being aware and present for someone, that really opens up a different arena that allows them as an individual to stand more fully in who they're meant to be by holding space like that.
And I think that's a hard thing to get a hold of. I mean, we are somehow born, I think by some of us certainly, to feel that we're called to a task of helping others. Mothering is always a piece of that, no doubt about that. As a mother and a grandmother and now a great-grandmother, that temptation to want to be helpful and to be, help people if they're in a difficult situation. And it's not that is something one shouldn't do. And as a matter of fact, it can be the compassionate move to make. But I think that I've struggled with the word compassion through Karen, through listening to her, when she says it is our way of being, of understanding our call within the world. What is it we are called to do, to be? And it's not our superiority that therefore we can feel sorry for someone. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having a feeling for someone suffering. That's not, I've had to say that a couple of times to people. They'll say, well, you sound very cold. And I said, well, I'm not saying that we don't have feeling for people that are struggling. And as a mother, grandmother, of course, I mean, you know that. But there's a higher thought about compassion, which really that it calls us to bring into being something that allows all people to be the best they can be.
Yes, that's beautiful. Now, you actually worked directly with Martin Luther King, and I'm wondering, that was such a powerful movement at that time. Is there an element from that time that you would like to see more of in the current movement that's starting to stir?
Well, I think so, although much of it is also what we see now. I mean, In my own case, I was involved with inviting him to come to my congregation, where I was at that point. I was not the preacher. I was a member of the congregation, and I have never gotten over the fact that people that I had known, people that I thought I knew, the end that they went to in order to keep him from coming to that congregation, I shall never forget. It changed my life. I thought, how can this be that we've had a preacher that has Sunday after Sunday stood up in front of us and called us to be dealing with the very issues that Dr. King was bringing to us, and then having the opportunity to have him at our doorstep to speak to us in person, for people to actually leave the church for that reason. And I'll tell you a wonderful piece of this was the pastor was with us all the way. And even though it was nor you can imagine that it got him in a lot of trouble. But the fact is, it was moving in a right direction. That was, 30 years ago now? And that pastor is now my husband. So that is quite a story.
Yes,
So
that's wonderful.
well, there's millions of things in between. His wife was affected with a very serious disease, and my own marriage, I ended up in a divorce. Part of it was that for a man trying to get ahead in a big law firm, it was not helpful to have his wife working for Martin Luther King. And so I think the gift to me as a person was to understand that to step out in front on an issue that is very controversial is probably what we're called to do and be. And it's and whether that comes to people out of a gift of faith or whether it comes out of a deep belief system, I don't think that's the issue. The issue is how do we become the person that sees our own weaknesses, not that we see it in others, we see it in ourselves, but we're able to say that to work toward the gift of life, something of importance in people's lives, including our own. It's life-changing, much more for the person that is struggling with it, I think, than it is to the gift that you may think you're giving to others. It's a constant struggle, I think. Certainly it is for me to say, why do I feel compassionate, or why do we feel called to compassionate? And sometimes the call isn't an issue that I have to wrestle with myself, and because your temptation to feel sorry. If you're gifted and you have plenty to eat and a good house to live in and children that have done very well, all those gifts are there. And, your thankfulness for that is real. But it also is a call to how is it that you see the rest of humanity? And for me, one of the hardest struggles has been not to feel sorry for someone, but to feel called to change the situation that is creating in them a sorrow. And that can happen internationally, it can happen person to person, and it can be a call in your life to think that way. And so for me, I think it's been a very important way of thinking about what life ought to be. And, people often say, you knew Dr. King, did he inspire you? Well, no question, because you had to be inspired by his commitment. But on the other hand, for those of us who knew him, we also recognize that the sacrifices within his family, within misunderstandings of people about who he wasn't always the great Martin Luther King. He had to go through a lot of difficulties, but he would be standing here with us to say, yes, we are called to compassion, and we are called, even when those people are doing things that we do not approve of and that we would like to, to end, we have to also always understand what is the word compassion calling us to. And in his case, he really believed that all God's children and that all were God's children. And I watched him go through that, and in fact, he died for it. And so not everybody has the opportunity that I had to know him. And there's other Martin Luther Kings around who don't carry the name, but they may be for other people that kind of a picture. And I think it's very difficult because people immediately kind of think, well, does this mean we have to feel sorry for someone? And I keep saying it's not about that, because then we become superior. It's more, how do we deal with the sorrow in life, and how do we take our position in trying to create a place where that is not the hallmark either of the people that you're dealing with or the place you're dealing with. And it's a tough call, and none of us can say that we've done it just right. I don't think there is a just right about it.
We're all learning, for sure. I think you bring up a really valid point about what we talked about earlier with Sandy's vision of the SG18, that the more we work on ourselves and our inner world, the more we're effective in how we respond to our outer world. And Laura Hansen made a quote just last night: the commitment to our inner work allows us to do the outer work well. And I think that really defines compassion in a much more empowered way. So then we're not looking at everything's kind of a reflection of how we're addressing our inner world. Would you, the three of you, respond to that? Or
I would absolutely love to respond to that, because that's the secret sauce in this organization. That is what makes this work, is that it requires us to pay attention to our own, like Reverend Joan just said so beautifully, our own, the lens in which we see the other. And it requires that, because we have this document that we've committed to, this Charter for Compassion, that reminds us of that. And everything we do through the lens, through the filter of that work. So it requires those two, the inner and the outer, to work in partnership together because of the suffering of the world. So you mentioned SDG 18, and that was actually, that's the unofficial Sustainable Development Goal that Joan's referring to. And that was inspired by one of our, another series, Reaction to Response, webinar calls, where we had this wonderful speaker from, he was at Department of United Nations for, oh gosh, I'm going to butcher this, Department to End Conflict and War, something along those lines. Please forgive me. I know I just gotten that wrong. Bob Zuber, and he said, regarding the Sustainable Development Goals, he mentioned that good policy requires good people. And it just dawned on me, well, that's the missing goal, that's the 18th goal of the 17 official, and this 18th, to make it requires personal responsibility to and self-advocacy to accomplish any goal that the United Nations has set forth in the Sustainable Development Goals. And so it's everything we do. It's what we focus on at Women and Girls. Joan, you're an amazing ambassador of this philosophy. You're constantly bringing it up, and I'm so grateful for that. And it's just this awareness campaign. It's nothing more than that. Perhaps when the goals come around for renewal, they'll consider it. But right now, it's all we can do is to remember our personal responsibility and self-advocacy, and stop waiting for a Dr. King right now. It's us.
it's us. Yeah.
For me, that's what the Charter does. The Charter has that medicinal quality to keep us reminded of our personal responsibility.
I have to say that I was very touched, what is it now, 3 or 4 weeks ago, when the young people began to speak out about what was happening in schools, and their capacity to take hold of this issue that people were wringing their hands about. What do we do? How do we keep our schools safe? So forth and so forth. And then the young people got out and they spoke their own words. And that was an afternoon where I couldn't step away from my television, and I'm not usually wed to the television. And because I thought these young people were saying very clearly, here's what we need to do. We can't have a school in which it's not safe for people to be there. But we who are, they took it upon themselves and said, we who are the students, we have to bring together a way in which we can be safe. And I thought this was incredibly moving. And every one of them were very young. I mean, you know, maybe in 8th grade, maybe in 10th grade. I mean, these were not young people. They were very young. And the fact that they had that kind of wisdom and so much as said to the others, to the elders, you know, where are you? I mean, here's what we think we can do because we're the ones that are affected by this. And the lesson for me in that, and it's through this whole thing, and I've said this to Karen Armstrong, is that we are not the givers of the wisdom. We have to be the listeners of where do we get this wisdom from? And that was Dr. King's greatest gift. I mean, he would often say, I learned something today. I listened to, I mean, he often talked about listening. I mean, when it came for the war in Vietnam, and people said to him, Martin, don't get into that. Do not get into that. You've got a job to do. And he said, how can I not be in that? These are God's people. And over again, when I watched him, that was what he did. When he felt it was a call that was more important or not to be ignored, he would move to it, despite the fact that all kind of people were standing behind him saying, you're Martin Luther King. Everybody knows you. They care about you. You get out there and do this, and you're going to find out that you get to be unpopular. And he would look at people and say, my job is not to be popular. It's to say the right word. And I thought, wow. I mean, I've never forgot that. He kept getting, people were really saying to him, Martin, don't you think you have enough trouble that you don't need to get into being against the war? And for him, it was like, he kept saying, it's all the same thing. It's all the same call. And those are the things I remember about him. And I don't think people write that up often enough, that he was called to be what he was called to be. And it wasn't necessarily tied to one thing more than something else.
Yeah, I love what you reminded us all about this, the power of our youth and the voices of our youth really stepping into their power. And it's what Marianne Williamson calls sacred enoughness. We use that word a lot at the women and girls sector. And it's what I think women were expressing after the last United States presidential election, that sacred enoughness. You know, there's one thing to be organized and to be activated and to be passionate about something, but then it takes it to a new level when you don't have a choice, when it comes from a different place. And that's what I think I personally saw with those young people on the news that same day, I believe, that the shooting at in Parkland in Florida. It was astounding and profound to see. I thought the women were on it. Look at, boy, you know, and thank you for your wisdom that we really have to listen. This is what our ambassador program is about at the women and girls sector, is listening. We recognize that the power of our work is not just in our leadership. You know, we have this responsibility to be almost like in shadow leadership, because those on the ground, those like Charles Barker, those like Brenda Augustin, those just like Joan Marie, that are out in the world, and Betsy Spano, and all of these, you know, compassionate people are out in the world, but we need to hear from them. So we created at the charter, at the women and girls sector, we created an ambassador program to give voice and to also give ears to all of us to hear what's happening on the ground. They have the finger of the pulse of the community in the palm of their hand, you know, and running through their veins. And so we need to listen to them. And so this is what our ambassador program does. And we meet weekly. As a matter of fact, everything that we have done in our sector has been designed, and if not approved of, because they're now the new leaders of the sector, by the ambassadors. Joan came up with this idea for V2020. It was Marie oh gosh, help me. It was,
Renee?
huh?
Renee Marie?
Renee, I get so many Maries and
Oh.
Renees and Joan. Sorry, Renee Marie, I love you and you're amazing. It was her passion that drove us to knowing that we needed a reaction to response webinar series and helped develop that along with Lisa Berkeley and you, Joan, and our ambassador. So everything you can look at in our sector was designed and developed originally by a core group of committed women advisory council members, and then completely taken over by ambassadors. So it's been all organic and naturally, or grown that way.
Well, one of the things that has really been compelling for me is that the charter seems to be an arena for people. We have a lot of people that are doing amazing work in the world, and that this is a way that still allows them to do and be who they are, but to be connected on more of a global level, and connecting with other people that are doing similar things. I felt compelled to bring this foundational conversation to the call this month, because I really wanted people to know and understand more about what the charter's doing, and the Compassionate Women and Girls, and also I'm one of the co-founders with Compassionate Capital Region, and what we're working on now is what we were discussing just a little bit ago about getting more of a youth council involved. And I know, Reverend Joan, you're involved with creating an elder council. Is that correct? Like a wisdom council?
Right.
Our wisdom council, right?
Yeah. Would you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, I'm sorry to say that at the moment I would say, and I've turned to Marilyn too, this is something that is for us a dream, and we have not moved as quickly as maybe we wish we could have to move that into possibility. As someone who is 86 years old, I have to say that it gets more attractive. I think I belong in that crowd at this point. But it's not just age, it's actually, the commitment that people have made. And it's very much in the birthing, I would say, at this point. But, and I get a little concerned, and I'm happy to hear from people that are on the call, that we not just make it people who have lived an outstanding, well-known life, because sometimes it's the person whose name we don't know, who has taken a position and has helped people through all kinds of difficulties, or even given people sometimes a teacher that will not ever get credibility, but will have helped young people see who they are. And so it's a kind of defining of what that really means. And it's tempting always to say, well, let's take the people whose names we know and who have deserved to be credited with what they have done. But for all the people whose names are known and their credibility is made more clear to a larger group, there also always are in smaller places with people who have done some remarkable things that are never going to be known because it just doesn't happen that way. And so it's just like when Karen started talking about compassion, that we have to think about not individuals so much. The recognition of individuals is not unimportant, but that it's how do we take hold of something like this? And what I watched the day I saw all those young people coming out and speaking, I thought, that's what Karen's been talking about. There is compassion in the mouth and the speeches of young people, and without huge matter of organization, or many of them will never see them again, or will never know the names of the people that spoke that day, but we're marked by what it was on that day when the young people began to speak out, that what it meant to, I think for many, many people mentioned to me how incredible to see how young people feel about this. And so it has always said to me that we need what people are doing. And it's hard because we get to know certain people, by their name and by who they are, Karen Armstrong. And Karen would be the first one to say, this is not a Karen Armstrong story. This is about compassion, and we need to find where it has changed things. And I would say that day of listening to those young people was a changing time. I've had many people speak to me and say, it's amazing. Where did they get this from? And, you know, as a grandparent and a great-grandparent, I say, I hope some of it from those who've been around them and some from their teachers. But the fact is that they took hold of something. And without a lot of training and a lot of this person's name matters and that one doesn't, we suddenly had young people giving to us what we needed to hear in that particularly difficult time. So sorry about that. That's my little speech for the day.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful. And I think in a lot of ways it's waking the rest of us up, you know, to the fact of where have we been? And as adults, you know, hearing these children and the clarity of their voices, that I do think it's creating a greater movement, and that we can help mentor them in that process to really step more and more fully into their power and their vision, and support them in that, because they are the ones that will be leading very soon. So how about you, Marilyn? You haven't talked in a little bit. I'd love to hear your response about what we've talked about, and also about the CES, the education, the CEI. I'm sorry, I said CES, CEI. Oh, we're not hearing you. We're not hearing you.
Sorry about that.
There we go.
As I was listening, the thing that came to mind is the incredible need that we have for balance in our life. That, you know, I know folks who will spend a lot of time discussing and ruminating, analyzing and critiquing, and never really get to what you were talking about with your feet on the ground and getting out there and working. You know, I think that the whole world was really enthralled with the students, as Joan was indicating. And, you know, why is it that they were so eloquent? And why is it that their minds were so open to so many issues? And I think that, you know, we do live in a different time. And I heard a cultural anthropologist say that we confront 400 times more material today than past generations do. So that demands a lot of us. And it awakens us to all of the problems of the world. But what it also demands is for us to take a different perspective about the world. And that our center of existence is just one small part of a global community and a global understanding. And I think that that's a part of compassion, that it's a precept of compassion to really begin to move towards alternative perspectives. And that's something I think I referred to a little in the beginning when I first spoke, that, you know, we have to be in solidarity with other people. We have to build coalitions with other people. But essentially, we have to understand them from their ethics, their morals, their values, their history, their tradition, in order to be really responsive to being a companion in a struggle with them. And I think that's what these young people are capable of doing, because they're able to move through different perspectives than we have been in the past. The other thing is that it's just natural that they have grown up in an interconnected and interdependent world. And it was not something that we didn't know about as we were growing up, but we did not see those intense connections that really surround us in our daily life. And you mentioned about CEI, which is the Charter Education Institute. And I think that we're trying to offer courses and coursework that deals with compassion for the self, compassion for others, meaning compassionate action, and then obviously for all living things, including the planet. They're short-term courses, and some are probably the longest that we've ever done is 8 weeks. There's one right now with Ed Bastian that just started the other night on compassion for the self. And I'm working on one right now on just, what is it? What is compassion? And what is this action component of compassion? And I think that one of the things that we're not talking a great deal about, and we did in past generations, and that's responsibility, social responsibility, civic responsibility, and how does that fit within the context of compassion? And I think both through CEI, through some of the programs that we're trying to put together, that's an important component of the whole mechanism of compassion. And I want to talk about, I started in the beginning to talk a little bit about education. I want to continue that. And just to take a couple minutes, 2 years ago in the Middle East, in Amman, Jordan, we worked to support something called the Compassion Summit. And we were able 2 years ago to get almost 300 students from 7 countries and 11 different schools who came together. And they worked hard. They came together to put together an action plan for their own school and community. They came back this March, reported on that, and expanded that whole notion about what is compassion for them as students. The teachers, the parents, representatives were involved. And that's an incredible model of where we can bring people together. On Golden Rule Day, we had a group of students from Karachi meeting up on Zoom with a group of students from Pune in India. And they were quite reticent about doing this. But the thing that was wonderful is they started to talk. And towards the end, one of the students from Pune invited the group of students from Karachi to come so that they could physically be together and continue their dialogue. And so I think that coming together, whether it's on an electronic platform like Zoom, or if we are so lucky to be able to bring people together where they can really see and hear each other's stories and really learn from one another with the kinds of wonderful programs that so many of our compassionate cities, communities, and our partners have devised. And it's really our partners that are pulling together some of these incredible programs and offering them with their special areas of expertise to the compassionate cities.
Do you feel the Parliament of World Religions is a platform for the world to see how people are working together and taking time to listen?
Oh, definitely. I've only been to one parliament. We're very involved in this new one that's coming up this year in November in Toronto. We'll have a number of workshops. Again, our cities will highlight them and the work that they're doing, but it'll be a tremendous opportunity for grassroots people from, we have already mentioned Dallas, Fort Worth, St. Augustine, Mexico, Canada, and we have people from India coming.
Will any of it be live streamed?
I don't know if the Parliament does that.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
But
thank
maybe, who
I
knows?
think it,
Maybe
I think it would be time that, sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Reverend Joy.
I was going to say, I think it is timing now that we might be able to work with them to, I mean, they don't have endless resources either. I mean, like many people doing good works, but I think helping people to see how much that would be of value beyond the partnership itself that is there. And for Marilyn, you have good access to the leadership. I know some of them. I think it's something that I'm sure they feel right now overwhelmed in trying to get ready for what they have planned. But this also would make a very good addition so that it could take on well beyond what people can physically participate in.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Reverend Joan. And we need to wrap up right now. We've gone a little bit over, but not too much. So I want to thank the three of you so much for this discussion, and hopefully you'll be able to stay on for the next half hour, our little after party where people can ask questions and get more answers. This hour, I really hope has inspired people to think about being playing a more active role. Like, how does compassion call you to serve in your community on a local and a global level? And coming in and partnering more with compassionate women and girls would be great. And next month, we have these calls for the V2020 about every 6 weeks. So May 30th will be our next one, and we're going to be addressing grief and how working with grief can be a powerful way of transformation for ourselves as individuals, and especially with the 18th for doing our inner work and how that empowers us to move forward. So I hope you join us then, and thank you again. Reverend Joan, are you able to stay on the call with us?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yay. So we want to thank Zoom again for sponsoring this call. And if anyone that's on the call feels compelled to support us financially, we appreciate any donations. And we hope to have more involved in the work that we're doing and being part of this great change that's for good that's happening on our planet. So we can open it up. So thank you again, Sandy and Marilyn and Reverend Joan.
Thank you, Joan, for all that you've done and continue to do and are doing so stunningly for the women and girls sector, to remind us of what we're doing, to remind us about the power of making the profane profound again, which is the purpose, as you said, of this vision, of this initiative that you're promoting, and how much a part of women and girls means to the world. So thank you so much. And I think I have successfully
Brenda.
everybody into the call. Reverend Joan, it's such an honor always to be in space with you. Thank you for that. And just a quick little something about the wisdom circle that we talked about, and whether we call it a wisdom circle or not, because we've yet to discuss that. It's so important that we bridge and listen and find our voice and anchor ourselves in this, and know that the Charter for Compassion is a platform for your voice to be heard. And so we invite you to join us at the Women and Girls sector under partners and ambassadors. And you could just reach out to us. You'll be getting an email about this call with everything. So that's it. Complete. So everybody is muted right now. I don't know if you're not. You can self-mute yourself.
Does anyone have a question that they would like to bring forward? I saw Brenda Gustin's face there for a moment.
Brenda's the co-chair of, co-director of regional co-director of Women and Girls sector in the Capital Region, Sacramento area with Joan. And I just, before she says hello, we also offer leadership within our sector, not only at the ambassador level, but also regionally. If you care to be the anchor for women and girls where you are in your city of compassion, then just let us know. We'll work with you.
Thank you.
I will say good morning, good afternoon. It is so lovely to hear you, Marilyn, Joan and Sandy, representing us. When I was invited by Joan to be involved, I had no idea why I was coming in, what my role would be. And yet I receive this kind of thing often where I know I'm supposed to be there. And so I listen and then try to figure out what my purpose is. And I adore us coming into learning more and more about compassion. And thank you so much, Joan and Marilyn and Sandy in particular, because you've been on this path for a lot longer. I've been working with compassion and trying to be with that. And it's lovely to see all of our women friends here, and Charles, you're there, and Braveheart women that I have been involved in for 4 years from different areas as well. So my purpose, and I love what you all said, is about bringing people together so that they have their voice heard. And then my other purpose is to be able to get into the physical body so the voice is actually heard. And so that means really stepping completely in rather than being in our heads. And so I've come to learn that in more and more ways because of our work and being together each week. So questions, wow, you know, I often go blank because you've just given so much here. And to me, when you're talking about decentralization, I was just in India for a month and have, you know, really tuned into I was in Rishikesh, where everything is alive and it's acknowledged as alive, the space between us. And that's what I feel compassion is, when I think Sandy said, when you look somebody in the eye, can you really turn away and not feel what's going on there? And it is about empathy, not sympathy. And so for me, it's about discerning the difference between that so that I don't take it on, because it's really not mine. It's there for me to lift up that person into the center of their being. So I always see the quicksand, and you don't get in the quicksand with them. You throw a rope, and, you know, then they grab it and you help pull. And there you're linking together some kind of connection, getting to know them. So thank you, Marilyn, and for leading this, Sandy for bringing us into this. And I took quite a few notes here. And I just, my next purpose I see happening and growing amongst especially local women here. I have a lot of people kind of singled out that I'm inviting is to be ambassadors. And so Joan, thank you so much for bringing this foundation. This was very important to hear.
Thank you.
I'll stop for now. So nice to meet you. So nice to be here and to be a part of this group. You're wonderful. Yeah.
By the way, your mute button, if you float your mouse to the bottom of your screen,
Thank you.
will be able
Yeah,
to
thank you.
not mute. And also, there are 2 call-in listeners that unfortunately can't be elevated, so you're in listen mode, and we apologize. Next time, I hope you'll join us on video.
Yeah, okay. So I think maybe a question that we could ask is, directly towards the compassionate women and girls on how, what's something that we can focus on now. Reverend Joan, I know you are passionate about the women and girls, and maybe each of you saying something about how you really see this as a place of power. With the 2020, the V2020, one of my favorite lines in the Mother's Day proclamation is that we will no longer have important questions answered by irrelevant agencies. And I think having these women, get more and more empowered, that gives us a voice. And also with the 100th year of the women's right to vote coming in the year 2020, that it does appear like we're moving towards something very powerful. Do you have any thoughts around that, Reverend Joan?
Well, I mean, it's, having not had time to really think it through in a helpful way. I mean, obviously, at my age of 86, I've watched many, many years of things come and go that relate to the world of women. And that is not to say that things have not changed, and women have, my grandchildren have different opportunities than I had, certainly. I have a granddaughter who's just graduated from medical school. I was discouraged from going to medical school because at that point in time, if you intended to have children, you shouldn't go to medical school because you wouldn't be able to stick it out. That was my dad, who was a doctor. And I think that this is part of the realization of the road that women have taken, not a prideful way, but a journey. And then to take a look at the journey that's before us, because there's still these issues that how do women, what is their call? What is it that we need to do and be that defines us and pushes us into something that is not just life-changing for women, but for all people. And I think that we've made a lot of progress in my 80-some years that I've seen, but there's more to be done, and there's some backsliding, as is always the case. But I think it's, and I think there's always the right before you is for women, yes, and for the world, yes. And so it's how do we work on the role of women and the way in which women can give of themselves and be honored for that. And yet, how does that also fit in with the larger needs that our world faces? And so I'm glad there is a group like this in existence. And I think it's a matter of how we keep framing who we are. And we're not saying that women are more special than men. It's
Right.
a matter that women have to have a place. And what is that particular place that can be given through the work and words of women?
Thank you. And I do think that the SDG 18 is giving us an opportunity to explore that our own inner power, that it can be expressed a little differently from the feminine, which the masculine and feminine is in all humans. And but exploring, I think we've done a lot from a masculine perspective, and so bringing this in, I think is really valuable, and giving women the opportunity to express themselves. So thank you, Reverend.
And to be honored, I think to be honored for high leadership. I mean, every now and then I get kind of annoyed. I guess we're all allowed to get annoyed every now and then. And people talk about, I look at my grandchildren and now great-grandchildren. And I think, yes, the world is far different than mine was, but it's still not the same for the women. There still is, there's work to be done, and important work to be done, not just so that we could have better jobs and so forth. There is that. But the other is the wisdom of women. How do we get that to be heard and taken And my own age probably affects this, but I think this is still an issue, is the words of women are not necessarily held with the same reverence as the words of men. And I think this is something that we have to take hold of. And, it's changing. It's changed dramatically in my lifetime, but it still is, there is something about the thing. When I watched all those young people that were on just about, what was it now, almost a month ago, I thought we really have to see that young people can bring us some wisdom that we have not necessarily paid attention to because they're young. And then I thought about it as a woman, and I said, and there are things that women can offer and things that we can make a play with in the best sense of that word, but it isn't. We've kind of backed away from that a little bit, and it's not anti-male, it's not anti-adult. When I watch the young people, it's a way of saying there are gifts to be given in all places and from many different ages, sexes, whatever. And I still think we have a long way to go in making sure that that's how we see it.
I would like to also, may I just interject real quickly? I know you've heard a lot from me. I want to hear from everybody here, but I have to respond to this because, it's something that Women and Girls really focuses on. It's not gender. While women and girls are disproportionately impacted by the global problems of the world, it's not going to be solved by women. It's not going to be solved by men. It's going to be solved, like Marilyn said, in balance. The balance between the divine masculine and the divine feminine. And real quickly, I'll share that I'm on the the Women's Task Force at the Parliament. I was asked to convene a panel with the title Coalitions of Women to Solve Global Problems. So I submitted a proposal. Coalitions of women will not solve global problems because they won't. It requires balance.
Right.
Yeah. And so with that, it was actually Jean Shinoda Bolin who I first reached out to and said, help me with this. And she said, I won't be on a panel that has that title. And we tweaked it, and we had a little fun, a little disruptive nature with it. And now Rianne Eisler is going to join us because her whole work is centered on the Center for Partnership Studies and the balance between the masculine and the feminine. So let's make that really clear. That's why,
right.
Thank God for Charles Barker is on this call. We need more men.
Yes, exactly. Well, I'm going to have to get off of the phone because I have some people in my house who are looking at me like it's time to do a few other things around here. So, but I thank you for the opportunity that was before us today, and also for the future. And thanks to everybody on this call, particularly the one person who's making it different. Okay, thank you.
Joan, before you leave, could I make? Yes. I just wanted to make one comment because your 86 years of age mandates what I'm about to say.
Yes, sir.
When I went to seminary from 2010 to 2014, one of the courses I took was Christian Heritage, which I'm sure you are thoroughly familiar with. And in studying Christian Heritage, I found out one significant point, that the women of this world have always been at the front, even though in the early millennia ago, they were in the backdrop, certainly, and with the patriarchal world that we've lived in since then, that's where they've remained, unfortunately. But if you look at St. Augustine and his mom's prayers, constant prayers, that led him to conversion, and the status that he had in that particular realm. Origen, who wanted to go martyr himself, and his mom stole his clothes so he couldn't do it back in the early Christian centuries. When you look at other major figures, when you look at our own Christian scripture in the book of John, where Mary Magdalene was the woman, she was the only one who was at the cross. She was the only one that was there when Jesus was crucified. You begin to understand the significance of that gender. And I think rather than call it change, and I will hush here in just a minute, but instead of calling it change, what I would like to say It is transformation of the space, a space that will do exactly what you said, Joan, and that is to honor the women of this world. And I immediately thought of Lady Wisdom that we talk about a lot in Christian heritage. So with that Christian language and that Christian twist, I thank you, Joan, for all you've done over the years.
Thank you, Joan.
Okay, well, thank you. All right. Okay, thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Reverend Joan. We have Judy Guadalupe on the line, and she wants to say something now. Judy?
Hi, yes, I don't know exactly why, but my video's not working, but I really want to thank you. I wanted to also thank Reverend Joan. I was at a conference several years ago, probably, I don't know, 15 years ago in Hawaii, and it was for kind of like a Children of the New Earth conference many years ago in Hawaii. And there was a 17-year-old, and he thanked all the people in the audience that were Reverend Joan's age to maybe our age, my age, you know, and he said, I want to thank you because of what you guys did with Martin Luther King and in the years of the 60s and you know, bringing, sorry about that. Hey guys, sorry. They agree. Bringing to the world, opening an actual vortex. He said, if it wasn't for what you did then, I would not be able to be here. The souls that are higher consciousness are piling in. So I wanted to just acknowledge that everything we're doing is way bigger than what we sometimes think, because sometimes the increments, and now what we're seeing where what feels like a backslide because of the transparency of everything is really a continued evolution and opening. And these young people in Florida, they're the next ones that could come because of us and because of people that come together in this vibration and consciousness of an unconditional loving portal that's creating a reality beyond what we can see on the third dimension. So I wanted to thank you guys, and I wanted to ask, so Joan has been telling me a lot about this because I'm kind of in a little bit of project overwhelm with other things. I haven't really zeroed in on exactly what everyone's doing. So I'm really honored and glad I came today. And, you know, I'm finding that I'm working with more 20 somethings and 30 somethings. And then I have a daughter who's 15 who has been having intruder alarms at her school right here in Sacramento. And so these young people, like, I'd love to see ways, what I see as us creating places that they can come together with each other in what I like to call atmospheres of awakening. So I would love to have all of you in these rooms and co-creating that vortex of unconditional love within which the wisdom of these young people can percolate and the actions can be developed from there.
Yeah, the Next Gen Task Force is under development.
The next, what is it?
The Next Gen Task Force. 8 to 32. 8 to 40, I think they extended it, yeah.
And also, Judy, with the California Vision 2020, the California Endowment is supporting a youth council. So we're really excited about integrating that and giving them a platform to share what they're doing, what their vision is, and helping us all grow. So this is a really exciting time.
Mm-hmm.
So we're at 9:27. We have 3 more minutes, and is Marilyn still on the line with us?
Marilyn sent a note that she has a 9:30 call. She had a call coming in, but so she apologized.
Okay.
Thanking everybody for the opportunity to dialogue with you.
Oh, thank you. Well, we had a wonderful talk, and I'm so grateful. I felt very guided by Spirit to start really with a foundation of who we are. And before we go, I'd love for Sandy to just say, I know that we could do a whole thing on it, but I'd love for you to share about what you're doing in Auschwitz, what you're involved with there.
Oh, yeah. Talk about tough compassion. The charter, the One Humanity Institute is a project with the intention of purchasing 11 Nazi barracks that are right across the parking lot from the Auschwitz Museum, otherwise known as the death camp. And we are working to provide an invitation to the more than 2 million visitors a year that visit Auschwitz as a place to process, as a place for education, both higher education and non-formal education, and then also with the Museum of the Future, where people with hands-on technology and consoles of state-of-the-art, technology, where people can actually imagine themselves in making a difference in the world, as well as a gallery of NGOs that are out in the world doing great things. So no matter where they return home to, they'll be inspired or empowered to either model or get involved with a way of making a difference, because so many people leave this dark, dead place. I mean, birds don't even fly over this space. It's remarkable. There's nothing that lives there. Grass is dead, nothing lives there. And birds don't fly there. You see no sign of life.
But you're infusing life into it.
Well, we want to honor it. We are not touching it. We're leaving it absolute sacred space. I have relatives whose souls who perish there. And so we are honoring that. We don't want there to be any confusion. What we're doing is we're providing a space that people can transform and not rush home, because the town of Oswiecim is known as the home of Auschwitz rather than we want to make it a city of hope. And the youth are all on this. They've been working on this for some time. So it's a pretty compelling and ambitious project. We have a several $100 million budget, and it's a big undertaking, but we're making headway with local government. And yeah, it's just like, it'll happen.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, everyone, and please mark your calendars. May 30th, we're going to have Michelle Mariscal and Janet Steinbach, and possibly a couple special guests as well. And we'd love to continue the conversation. And if you have ideas or comments, please post on Facebook V2020. And we'd love to hear from you and stay connected. And thank you, Sandy, for all you do. And even though Marilyn and Reverend Joan aren't on the line, I just want to thank you all. And thank you for everyone that tuned in, and many blessings. And let's keep this going. Thank you.
Joan.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a beautiful day, everybody.
Thank you.